I think all the time how, I'm very, compared to a lot of the guests that you have on your podcast, for example, I'm a very inexperienced entrepreneur. And so the amount of time that I would cut out in the next venture, just in that sort of exploration phase, understanding all those learnings that come, that does take time. I mean, the idea for Mamamade came 2 years ago, and we've really only been going for about a year.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Good Luck Club podcast. My guest today is entrepreneur Sophie Baron, founder at Mamamade. Hi Sophie, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Would you mind starting off by telling our audience a little bit about you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm American, if you can't tell already. I was sort of born and bred in New York, and went through various kind of career changes, eventually landing up in London, doing a PhD, and then becoming the head of operations for a tech company in the employee benefit space. And I very quickly after getting married had a daughter and really found myself sort of at sea with that change that comes with new parenthood, not really knowing kind of what to do with myself and this free time, really not free time, but this unstructured time that I hadn't had really ever in my life. And the only way I could really kind of find my feet again was to go back to work quite quickly by UK standards. So around 6 months. And that's the same time that you typically introduce solids to a baby. So it was that sort of confluence of events that made me realize just how outdated the services available to modern parents are in the UK. There was nothing as a brand or as a product was speaking to the working parent, to the parent that needed that support, that wasn't surrounded by family, that wasn't surrounded by really that village that you need. So that led me to start working on Mamamade, and we now deliver everything that parents need to create delicious, nutritious, home-cooked meals for their babies. And yeah, it's been a journey, but I'm really pleased to see it now taking shape 1 year later, and yeah, doing quite well, thankfully.
It's a fascinating story. I think our listeners will really resonate with your process, and I think myself, I also not so long ago, 3 years ago, had a baby too, and it's such a life-changing moment, isn't it? So I think, but having said that, starting a business is also a life-changing moment. So you combine the two. And that is not easy. I actually had to stop working personally for a few years when my son was born. I don't know how people function without the sleep. And so how have you managed?
Thankfully finding a very good nursery, I would say, is just that was my way of finding support, was being able to find that structured environment around her. Very lucky to have a very supportive partner who was really sort of pushing me to pursue this dream. And then working in a day job that was also very supportive. They essentially incubated the idea of Mamamade when I was going back to work, and then I had this idea and I was speaking about it with them. They really encouraged me to actually stay in my job, keep earning money, until it got to a point where it just wasn't really sustainable anymore. But yeah, it has been a bit like having two babies in 2 years sort of feeling, I would say. Definitely growing a business and is not too dissimilar from having an actual child.
It's interesting because there's some ironic, you're actually feeding the baby with your business. There's some interesting marketing tagline around that, right?
Yeah, we're sort of our own focus group, I would say, as my daughter is growing up. It's like, oh, what do we need next? What do I need help with now? But yeah, so it's definitely, it's very organically grown out of my kitchen. We only quite recently moved into a proper facility with a proper kitchen team. It was quite scrappy and from my home for a while.
Well, I think that's a good way, again, for our listeners to understand that most good businesses do start that way. We all know Google started from a garage, right? It's sometimes a very smart way. What I like about what you just said, and I want to pick up on it, is the company you were working for incubated and supported you. That feels unusual. And again, I'm thinking about my listeners out there that want to start a business and feel that they've got a job, but they've got to keep going and doing that job and they can't get their business off the ground. I love that. I love the fact that your previous company actually helped you. That's special.
Yeah, no, it really is. It's a really, it's a special place. The business itself is in that business of employee benefits and employee recognition. So you could say it was also just part of the culture of the company. But the two CEOs were the founders, so they had themselves been on that entrepreneurial journey at some point. And they've actually now both become investors in our seed round, which, yeah, it was great. I think to have that support was really amazing. And it was not something that I went in knowing that I could even ask for. Although in hindsight, and I suppose for anybody listening, I suppose it can't hurt to, if you are in a kind of an entrepreneurial environment with those sort of founders, to be quite open and honest about what your own career ambitions are. Because people are usually quite supportive.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's a really interesting insight there that a lot of people miss. I think that there's a concept, of course, in an interview, probably if you sat in the interview and said, hi, I'd love to work at your company. And what I'm really thinking about, though, is my own business. And right. So I actually do have those conversations in interviews with people that come to work with me. I actually really like to understand what their long-term dreams are and try to help make that happen. But, I think for a lot of people listening out there, your experience, your point there, I think they could really try it. And I know maybe you've got to be in the job already and have a relationship with the people that you've been working with for a little while. But I absolutely think it's an avenue for anyone listening out there of starting your own business. You might be surprised if you're good at what you do, people don't necessarily want to lose you. So if there's a way for them to help you get what you want and also ultimately get what they need too, whether that's a careful transition to someone new coming in or whatever it may be, or become an investor in your business. I just think that's a beautiful example. And so that's wonderful to hear. I feel like we should give them a shout out. Do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. They're a brilliant company. They're called X-Exec. One of their brands is Staff Treats. They do a range of discount programs and recognition programs for large corporates and SMEs across the UK. And yeah, it was I remember taking the job and not really being too sure about the sector, just being like, okay, I'll get some work experience in the UK. And they really are a company that practice what they preach in terms of employee recognition and putting those cultures into place in companies across the country. So, and actually across the world as it happens. So, that was, a really kind of, on the topic of luck, lucky confluence of events.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think we'll put their links in the broadcast too. I think people that do this deserve a shout out, and I feel like it's one of those things that I'd like anybody listening that has a business, because we have a lot of entrepreneurs that also listen to this show that have existing business, not just people that want to learn how to start a business. If you can start doing that for your staff, supporting them in their dreams, they will support you in yours. And so definitely. I think it's a really, really good thing, and I'm glad that there's a story like this out there. So tell us about the whole process of building the business, and maybe just for our guests, for our audience to understand our guests. Sometimes I like to understand, what is success for you, so they can get a reading of what matters to you.
I think there's sort of two metrics of success that I'm tracking. There's the one that's sort of internal to myself, of kind of what does success mean to me personally in my own career, in my own life. And then of course there's like, what does success look like in the business? And for myself, I think naturally, as for anyone, that's definitely changed shape over the years. And at the moment, I think being more family oriented than I've been, it's sort of that, am I managing to run my business and grow my business and also be present for my family life in a way that feels good and right and balanced. And then for the business, seeing this community grow, seeing how we're helping parents feed high quality, nutritious meals, and just seeing that kind of growth of that company, seeing that there really is an appetite for this sort of product, that really feels like, okay, we're really doing something right here. So when everything's in flow in that sense, that feels like real success.
The whole purpose piece, which is how I interpret what you're saying, that the business has a strong purpose, right? You're helping families ultimately deal with a difficult problem, which is feeding their children nutritional, healthy meals on the go, right? That's hard for a lot of people, busy lives and so on. So, have you always been purpose driven, or it sounds like, even the job you were working in before, it's a kind of, as you say, a staff treats this kind of concept of helping people. I mean, has that always been a theme in you, or is this something you've developed as you've gone through your education and career?
That's a really good question. I would say it's not necessarily something I've consciously pursued, although when thinking about taking positions that have felt right or doing things that feel right, then yes, in hindsight, there is that theme sort of running through of feeling like I'm doing something purposeful that has an impact on people, even if it's part of a structure that's having an impact on people. With Mamamade, it so organically grew out of my own need and my own house that you could say it was actually, the purpose was initially just to help myself, and then realizing that actually I'm not alone in this situation at all, and there are so many other parents out there experiencing these issues like myself. And so I wish I could say I went out to save the world, but I think it was probably actually originally more selfish than that. But then seeing how much help this was bringing to other parents, that does sort of drive you to keep pushing on and developing the business in a way that keeps feeding off of that and keeps giving back on that point.
But I think there's another wonderful learning from your point there, which is sometimes people are put under a little bit of pressure to find their purpose. Like, what is your purpose? Don't start a business until it's purposeful. I think I've even said it myself at points. Having said that, sometimes, like you're saying, you can start something that solves a problem for yourself, and over time, purpose builds. It's not always easy to start a business with huge purpose from day one. I mean, even myself, you need experience. Like I'm now doing what I'm doing because at 15 years old, I started a business that didn't have any help. And then here I am 20 odd years later, I'm able to look back and realize there's loads of things I can do today to help that 15-year-old me. So why don't I do it? And I think if you hadn't had that experience, you wouldn't necessarily know that that's your purpose now, right? So that's your process.
Absolutely. And I think all the time how, I'm very, compared to a lot of the guests that you have on your podcast, for example, I'm a very inexperienced entrepreneur. And so the amount of time that I would cut out in the next venture, just in that sort of exploration phase, understanding all those learnings that come, I would say, just from that exact experience, as you've just referred to, that does take time. I mean, the idea for Mamamade came 2 years ago, and we've really only been going for about a year. But that whole year in between, in a way, next time round, I think would just be cut out completely.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, you're an old soul. I can sense it, and I think experience. I think a lot of our listeners who listen to some of our other podcasts, I'm always very proud of all the podcasts we've done, but sometimes you can hear about some entrepreneurs who have, like Simon Long, who's built We Love Banks, from zero in 7 years to one of the world's largest online banks with 43 million customers. And sometimes people feel like that's all quite unobtainable, like, oh, well, he was a one-off or lucky, and they're never going to be able to do that. I think what I like about your story is, frankly, the organic way you've done it. I think, the truth is, if you apply yourself, you get the right support behind you. And you mentioned your partner, for example, earlier. I think that's crucial, having a partner support. You've got the support of the company you used to work for, and then you've got a problem you're solving for yourself, and bang, there you go. I think a lot of people could relate to that journey, and a lot of people don't take the leap, which you've done. And that's part of what I think I'm trying to do with the podcast, to show people that it's possible, and talk through your process. So when you came up with a business idea, I mean, was Mamamade the name from day one, or a lot of people want to know about branding? How did you come about with the name?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. I definitely obsessed over the name probably more than I needed to. I probably should have been focusing more on the product, but there is a sense of I'm going to start a business, and what am I going to call it? And I knew that because originally what we started with were these mixes. I can just show them here. These mixes, which the idea is that you can puree it, you can mash it, you can use it whole. We've now got a few other lines as well. But so the idea that actually the parent had a hand in crafting that meal, which was a differentiator in the market. So wanting to hone in on that idea of it being made, and I think I saw the word like marmalade on a jar, and I was like, oh, that kind of looks like Mamamade. And that was sort of it. There wasn't too much thought. I think we probably could have charged, someone could have charged us a lot more money to come up with a better name than that. But that was sort of the process of it. And then it sort of stuck, I guess.
I like the name a lot. It's funny with branding, people always give you an opinion. If Mamamade is listening, it's a very different name. Okay? Please leave startup founders alone with your brand trademark lawyers. But it's awesome, and I love the story of that the parents are involved in making the product. I mean, as a parent myself, I have a child with allergies, so it is very scary for us ever eating products that aren't homemade. So I like the idea of being involved in the process. Just out of interest, do you ever allergy side? Is that something you're tackling, or is it tricky?
Yeah, actually, that was so my partner actually has allergies, and my nephew, who's a similar age to my daughter, has a very severe egg allergy. So I saw and I have seen firsthand that struggle that comes with a child who has allergies. So all of our meals in our facility are completely free from the big 8 allergens. And that's something that we're really committed to, staying free from egg and soya and dairy, because it is surprisingly hard to find products that can be guaranteed free from. And I know, for parents, it's such a source of stress. So that's something that actually I really feel strongly about.
It's not often, I mean, I'm being a bit general here, but PhDs becoming entrepreneurs isn't that common. Is it? Did you always feel like you were an entrepreneur? Were your parents entrepreneurs? Was it always there, or how did it manifest itself in your life?
Yeah, definitely not your typical entrepreneur story. I suppose in my family, there are entrepreneurs, my grandfather, my aunt, but within my sort of immediate family, we're all quite traditionally educated and following traditional lines. And there was sort of no question growing up that, I'd go to college, I'd get probably another degree after that, and maybe possibly another degree after that, and then go into some very kind of structured career. So I think that was a lot of the frustration that I found in my career as I was kind of going through, is that I still didn't really know what I wanted to be when I grew up, which probably explains pursuing a PhD, because it allowed me to stay in school and not have to answer that question. So it wasn't this idea of always being an entrepreneur. I can contrast that to my partner, who is very entrepreneurial, has started businesses, exited businesses, and gets that thrill from it. For me, it's been a real learning process. I know I've referred already to that kind of year of learning that I had, and I'm still, I would say, in that process of learning kind of how to be an entrepreneur, what it means to be a founder of a business. Definitely not someone who dreamt her whole life of doing this sort of thing.
And when you told your parents you were going to start your own business, what was their reaction?
Do you know what? They were actually surprisingly very supportive, I think. And they continue to be very supportive. I think for them, they understood kind of straight away what the proposition was. I did manage to convince them that there was a real market and opportunity for this sort of thing. And I think they've always been very supportive of kind of pursuing interests and doing something interesting and doing something that allows you to feel fulfilled. So they were always very supportive of the idea. It wasn't too out of the box, surprisingly.
They'll probably listen to this broadcast, so I feel like you have to say that. They're very supportive.
No, but honestly, I think it was I was a little bit surprised, but I think for them, in a weird way, it was actually a more obvious step for me to take than to be, for example, doing operations at a tech company, which didn't seem to be, flowing so logically from a PhD. Whereas actually, PhD, you are kind of in charge of your own time and your own research, and you are managing yourself in that way. So I think that step actually, in a way, there was a bit more of a relief of like, okay, she's got some bit of direction now.
I think, again, I'm always thinking about my listeners. I think the process, looking at your kind of CV, I guess, you right-hand person, editor at large for Vogue, and then you research support at the London School of Economics and Political Science. There's a trend there, which is frankly this very high-profile brand and image stuff, and then there's a change. And so I'm interested in that moment. Was it by accident, or did you say, well, I've worked at these big brands and they're not as fulfilling as I thought, so I'll go and try a more personal business? Or what was the process there? I'm putting words in your mouth, sorry, but what was the process?
No, it's something that I think about a lot, because it's something I'm very conscious of. I would say is, I had followed this path of exactly that, of sort of being associated with brands that people know about, and then making a shift. And I think it actually just had to do more with, I was at a period where I was trying to understand myself a lot. I had come to London, didn't know anybody here, didn't really have any support here, met my husband quite quickly. And I think I just found myself in a place of wanting to be in a slightly lower pressure environment, I would say, than I had been, wanting to just have a kind of career that I could just kind of sink my teeth into and not feel that pressure of the brand or the pressure of the person that I was reporting into. And, you know, as we've discussed, it actually ended up being the most positive thing I could have done for my career, was kind of taking myself out of that rat race. That's quite New York, I would say, in the sense of chasing the brands. And yeah, that was where the most sort of development happened professionally, and the contacts that I made there ended up being very fruitful for Mamamade. So it was a pivot for sure.
A great pivot. Another learning, I think, for anyone listening. You know, I think you can go through the process on your own, of course. You know, you go and work for these big brands, and sometimes it works for people and sometimes it doesn't. A lot of the time the brand doesn't matter, it's the people you work with, right? So, but I do think the process there you've gone through is what a lot of people be dreaming of it, to be honest. You know, get a PhD and then work with Vogue and then go work at the London School of Economics. I mean, that sounds like for a lot of people the exact dream structure they'd have if they could. And then here's the pivot that you take that kind of changes your life forever and creates a whole new universe that you're learning about now, which is fascinating. When you met your partner, was he an entrepreneur straight, you know, was then and there, or is that what you probably fell in love with?
Yeah, he had just basically ended a previous startup of his, hadn't worked out. And I think it was like on our first date that he was explaining to me that process of kind of acknowledging that sort of quote unquote failure, I would say, of the business. And I just really respected that conversation. I think to build something up and then acknowledge it's not working, and actually be able to take all those learnings and then move on to start something else, which he had done. Those were real qualities that I respected, and I didn't realize because I just had never been exposed to entrepreneurs in that sense before. I'd always, you know, gone out with the quite kind of like lawyers, doctors sort of people. So to hear someone talk very openly about failure was really eye-opening to me. And especially going into Mamamade, I would say has completely changed my risk appetite. You know, you just sort of understanding what that process is of why businesses don't work out. And it's really, a lot of it is just what you take from that and how you pick yourself up again.
It's interesting, isn't it? This concept of failure, you know, of course in startup world it's good to fail. And I think for a lot of people, they find that hard to process. I think in your partner's case, I'm sorry, I keep saying his part. What's your husband's name?
Sorry, yeah, he does have a name. Ian.
Ian. Hello, Ian. I'm sure you're listening. I think in Ian's case, you know, ironically, his business failing meant that he found the perfect partner in life.
That's a very good twist.
So it's interesting, isn't it? Like failure at the time probably seems catastrophic, but in reality, something much more exciting can come from it. I think I saw a quote from Elon Musk yesterday on some tweet. You know, some people, the door closes, another one opens, but some people just don't see that the other door's open.
Yeah.
And so, you know, good for you, Ian. Good for you. I think that I always have this thing about, you know, is entrepreneurship born or bred? I have these permanent debates with people about it. So I like to ask my guests, you know, what they think. What do you think? Are entrepreneurs born or bred?
I feel like I'm proof that they can be bred, that they can be nurtured. I had an idea, but it took a lot of encouragement from other people to get it going, such as my previous bosses, Ian, my partner, and also the support of people within kind of the startup community, finding mentors who can, especially as a woman entrepreneur, getting that support to get around a lot of that mindset stuff. Like we've just discussed failure and how that doesn't necessarily need to be a bad thing. That is something that's learnable, I would say. It's like that is something that you learn how to talk to yourself. You learn how to reframe things in a way. So, I've learned a lot about how important mindset is as an entrepreneur, and that all of that is, extremely learnable.
Do you think you've had a big break in the business, or how do you feel about the process so far? Is there a moment where it's gone, wow, there was a lucky moment? How do you see it?
I guess going back to that idea of kind of how you frame things, that moment of lockdown for us, several months ago only, was a real turning point, I think, where we saw things shift for the business tremendously. Just learnings that we thought would take a lot longer in sense of frozen food for babies, in the sense of the value of subscription services for babies. The direct to consumer element, all of that got erased almost overnight, and really helped us just accelerate our growth. And now we're being able to sustain that growth, indicating to us, that it's not just a nice to have during lockdown. In this weird way, it was that period of real, panic. And we're still in that, as we're having this discussion now, in this period of uncertainty. And, but in a way, it was a very kind of lucky change for us, because it let us kind of leapfrog, I would say, 3 to 6 months of learning.
Do you think coronavirus as a issue in everyone's business has been a hindrance, or are you saying there that it's actually helped in a way, this business wise? How was it played out?
I would say, like, for us as a food business, particularly as a subscription service for parents, many of whom found themselves looking after their children full time for the first time, since birth. It was a real kind of lucky break for us, in that sense. But again, everything's been building. So, everything that I've done in the past and was working on to build to this point allowed it to scale quite quickly at that opportunity. It could have just as easily been too much for us, and we could have, just had to put the pause button on. But we were building to this point, and then the lockdown, we saw tremendous growth within like 4 weeks.
It's interesting because I think different perspectives. Before I'd heard that, when I was thinking about your business and how maybe if people are at home, suddenly they've got time to cook. But it's perfectly feasible that people equally don't have time to cook. They've got a lot of other things to do to entertain the children and so on, right? So, my wife and I, we order in food for ourselves all the time. I think we'd love to do that for our son. It's just the allergy side that we continue to be a little bit nervous about. So if you can tick that box, we're definitely going to become your customer.
Of course. Yeah, no, and we'd be happy to send you a box. But I would say parents found themselves having to cook every meal, whereas a lot of times the nursery cooks meals, or if they've got nannies or grandparents helping out, then they're helping out with the meals. And, for me as well as a parent, I was faced with all of a sudden, like all 3 of us eating every single meal at home. It's like plus snacks. It was just felt like a constant sort of in and out of the kitchen.
Cleaning, washing up, making. Cleaning, washing up,
exactly.
making. Yeah, totally. And I personally, I try to cook as well for our son. But even when my wife does the heavy lifting even today, which I think is something wrong with that, but I try very hard to do the cooking too. But it is a lot of work. It is a lot of work. Three meals a day plus snacks for a hungry 3-year-old. Honestly, it's just never ending.
It's the mental bandwidth as well. Like I just this morning, went to make my daughter's lunch for nursery and opened the fridge. I was like, I have to order groceries again. It keeps, and thankfully we have that luxury of being able to just order food to the house. But I'm
just grateful we've got running water. The old days, people have to get a bucket and go down the street and fill up their bucket of water. Imagine that. My son drinks, I think, about 6 buckets of water an hour. So, yeah. But I noted in your history how much you loved writing. And so how do you balance, I don't know how much writing you're doing now. It feels like there's probably a book in your story. But, how do you balance out those things that you still like to do with, say, the running of the business?
I think it's actually quite lucky at the moment that we're in this time where content is really the best way of reaching people. And at Mamamade, what we've seen is this real community start to percolate around the product. And that's community that's responding not just to the food and the recipes, but to people opening up about the experiences of parenthood. And for me, I've actually found communicating with our community over Instagram and being very open about different struggles and different challenges as a mother and as an entrepreneur has been a really amazing outlet for me, but also a very sort of useful way to connect with people. For instance, I shared a couple of weeks ago that I'm actually expecting again, and opened up about that experience and that journey to this point, and have launched a newsletter to connect with people on a different level. So there are ways to kind of keep channeling what I feel fulfilled by the most, which is that kind of writing and connecting through the written word. And it's also a nice way to kind of connect and build an audience. So that content side has been really important for us at Mamamade.
So I think folding your passions into the business seems to be the way, right? I think a lot of people sometimes separate them. I like to play golf, for example. I'm not very good, but I try to have them for business meetings while I'm playing golf. So I suddenly sound very elitist, but golf's for the common man these days.
You have to do things in a way that feels authentic to you. I think that's been a real learning for me. Is I can't necessarily copy what other brands are doing, or because it doesn't feel right. It has to come from within me and within what the business is. Yeah, what does that need to look like to me to feel authentic as a founder? That's been a really important piece, and that's what people I think ultimately are also connecting with.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think it's also interesting your story from a listener's perspective when you talk about, okay, so here's someone that loves writing, that's good at writing. I've read some of your stuff; it's really good. You've got that ability. Hey, the natural instinct is go work for Vogue, which you did. But I think it's interesting when you can then go further down the line and realize, well, that's too straight a line. It wasn't go work at Vogue. It was start your own business and leverage your writing skills and love for writing into the business, which is, I think, an interesting way I want people sometimes to realize, and your story illustrates it so well.
Yeah, and again, not consciously done. I think it's just
I mean, often a lot of what we do is in the subconscious anyway, right? But a lot of people do the first step, which is they love writing, so they go work at Vogue, and then they're there forever, good or bad. But
right.
Most of the time I see people working for other people not necessarily enjoying it, get stuck with the brand image versus the reality of doing the job. The great thing about what you're doing now is you can write, like you say, the way you want to write in authenticity. But when you're working for Vogue, you have to write as the voice of Vogue, right? So that wouldn't necessarily be an authenticity piece that you've discovered is so important to you. And frankly, I couldn't agree more, so important for customers to feel too, right?
Absolutely. There was definitely that moment, I would say, that I realized, like, well, I am writing a lot, but is this the topic I want to continue writing on? Are these the things that I want to continue exploring? And it was a tremendous learning experience. I still think that was sort of like a master's degree working there with the amount that I learned. But yeah, it does come a point where you realize it's not exactly what you think it's going to be or what you want your life to look like. Again, going back to that feeling of what feels like success. And it definitely came time to make a shift.
Yeah, I think the image side, if you tell people, on your LinkedIn, what you're working at Vogue and you're a writer, the image is, that's the dream. When you say you're working for yourself and it's hard work, people are like, why would you do that? But in reality, the truth is, it doesn't sound as glamorous, but the reality is you enjoy your life more. And by the way, congratulations from me and the listeners on having soon to have a second baby and a third startup.
Yeah, exactly. Third child.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I guess I could talk to you all day. I just love your openness about the whole process. But do you think, if you look going forward, looking at your history of your life, do you think luck has played a role? How do you feel about luck?
I think of luck in two ways. I was always raised being told you make your luck in life. And so much of what happens or what you just, is about attitude and how you think about things, or going back to that thing about framing what happens. But I also acknowledge the extreme luck of, the circumstances of my birth that allowed me to go to, an excellent colleges and universities and have experiences that were based a lot on the privilege that I had of just being born in New York City. As a white passing individual. So I have to acknowledge that. But I do think that a lot of what's come, within my career and my personal life, it is about what you make of luck and what you make of your life. And there've definitely been situations, for Mamamade that have felt like, oh, this is like bad luck. This is like so annoying or bad timing. But again, it's that sort of question of what can you learn from it and take it going forward. And that doesn't necessarily come naturally, but when you do kind of get into the habit of learning from those bad experiences or bad situations, and turning it into a positive, not necessarily, but just learning from it, then you start to feel a lot luckier on the whole, I would say.
Well, I think our listeners are lucky that Ian's company failed. She might not be here right now.
Definitely. It's all thanks to him.
Yeah, it's all thanks to him, totally, yeah. Well, I thank you for your time. I'd love to, I've been saying this to all my guests lately, so it's starting to sound, but I really mean it. I'd love to have you back on the show. I think I'd love to follow your journey. We'd love to hear more about the process as you're going through it. So love to have you back on if you're up for it and share what's happening. I'm going to sign up as a customer today, so thank you. And we'll put the links below for anyone that's interested in knowing more about what you're doing. I guess I always like to end the podcast with a light question, which some people argue is not that light. But if you went back to your younger self and gave some advice, what would it be? And I kind of think you are still quite young, so you go back to your 7-year-old self or something. But what advice would you give your younger self, do you think?
I guess I would maybe start, encouraging myself to start earlier on the thinking about what success means to you in terms of how you feel about your life. We've spoken about it a bit, but how I was quite focused on going to these brand places and having these kind of names on my resume. And I think that obscured a bit what I actually wanted out of life. And I wish I had learned earlier that that doesn't matter so much as having a purpose and feeling fulfilled by what you're doing.
Yeah, it's very interesting that I wonder how easy it is to transfer that knowledge you're highlighting there into people that haven't yet had the experience of working for a brand. It's really interesting if you went back to your younger self and said that, whether it would make any difference and whether it's a good idea to have changed the path anyway, because I think you really appreciate what you've got now in part because of the experience you've had in those brands, right?
Of course. I suppose it's just thinking about exactly that. What do you intend to get out of a workplace or out of a university or out of an apprenticeship or internship? What are the reasons behind it? And I think nowadays, especially, people appreciate that untraditional path a bit more. We appreciate that learnings can come even if you don't go to university, that you can have a really tremendously successful career without having that. And so I think it's just being brave enough to kind of be true to what feels right for you rather than doing things because you feel like you have to or because you think that's what's going to make other people proud of you.
Yeah. You're saying something very profound there, actually. And I think it's quite hard to translate the experience into maybe the listeners' subconscious, but I think I couldn't agree more. I think what the trap is, I think the trap is that you buy into image over authenticity. So
that's a very good point.
I think it's knowing yourself, isn't it? What you're saying to your younger self there is kind of like just and I think a lot of you it's amazing what you've done because you've gone through that experience. You could have easily got trapped in those trappings, in that image, that business card, that whatever, that lifestyle. And so I think, and if that suits you, but if it's not your authentic self, or that's the right word, or if it's not really who you are, I think you got to look at yourself. And I think that's really good advice actually for people out there and your younger self. But I think you've turned out brilliantly. So perhaps it's all the right thing in the end anyway. I'm going to sum up some of the things I've taken from your story today, and so a few things I think I want to make sure the audience hear. I like the point we talked a lot about how you frame things. I think that's very important, the way you look at different elements of what's happening in your life. I like the point you also made about sharing your struggles. I think this might be the t-shirt we make a t-shirt of what I guess say. So I think as for me, I like this share your struggles. I think there is a big taboo even today with people suffering in silence, and I think that a problem shared is a problem halved. I mean, But even though we know these things, people feel worried to do it. So, I admire you sharing, I guess the excitement and fear of having another child, for example. These things everyone feels them in different degrees either way, but the fact that you share it, I think that sharing the struggles piece is so good. Being authentic, I just couldn't highlight your point there enough over and over again. I think people get lost sometimes in the Instagram world or whatever it is. Being authentic can bring you true happiness because you are who you are. So I think that's a really good message from you there. I like this concept of being fulfilled, reminding people to check back in on that. What's actually going to fill their cup? Is it going to be working for Vogue? Is it really, or is it what you're actually doing at Vogue, right? So that being fulfilled piece. I like the point to remind people as well to be present, which you mentioned earlier. I think a lot of people, entrepreneurs or anyone out there, we sometimes can get lost in what we're doing and making sure that we're present and there for the ones we love. I really think that's awesome. And I just want to end by saying that the Staff Treats management made a massively successful investment in you, and I respect them as business people a lot. I think everybody who has a business should encourage someone to start a business. So thank you so much for sharing your story, Sophie. We'll be following you carefully and supporting you where we can. And so thanks so much.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. Honestly, it's been so great to meet you and to chat with you. And thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast show today. We know you have thousands of podcast shows that you could be listening to, and you choose us, and we feel very lucky. If you've enjoyed Sophie's insights today, then perhaps give her a like on one of her social media channels, mention her, give her a comment, and let us know that you found this podcast useful. It means the world to us. Equally, if you know anybody out there right now that needs Sophie's service or needs to hear this story, then share it. Make sure that people out there that are starting businesses don't feel alone, and anyone out there thinking of starting a business, even if you've got a PhD, can do just that. We look forward to seeing you back at the podcast, Good Luck Cup podcast, next week.